Hi class, this section is on 2.8, functions, inverses of functions. So let's take a look at this first problem. It says a graph of a function f is given. Does f have an inverse? So that's pretty easy to test. All you got to do is apply the horizontal line test. If you draw a horizontal line, well, first you have to check if it's a function. And for that, you would draw a vertical line. And if it passes the vertical line test, then it is a function. As you can see, no matter where I draw the vertical line, it only intersects once. Therefore, it is a function. So it is a function. So that's the first thing you should check. Now we can check to see if it's a one-to-one function. So for that, we need the horizontal line test. And if it only intersects once, that means it is a one-to-one function, which it is because it only intersects once. So it is a one-to-one function as well. So our answer would be yes. It has an inverse. All right. If so, find the following. All right. So for this, the input of the function is the output. I'm sorry, how can I state this? So the input of the inverse function is the output of the normal function. So 2 would be the output of f. So that means it's the y-coordinate. So here's 2, and you got to see where it's crossing the graph. It's crossing right here, which means that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. So that is our answer. So it's basically, you're reversing the x and y coordinates. 2, 5 is the coordinate of the inverse function, and 5, 2 is the coordinate of the regular function. So you're just reversing the x and y coordinates. All right, same thing here. 7 represents your y coordinate for the f function. So if you go to 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, that would correspond to an x coordinate of here, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that is our answer. All right. Let's move on to the next question. So if the point 7, 6 is on the graph of the function f, then the point 6, 7 is on the graph of the inverse function. So remember what we said. If you're swapping the points, that's what the inverse is. It's when you make the x coordinates y coordinates and the y coordinates x coordinates. So the point that would correspond to that for the inverse would be 6, 7. You simply have to swap the two coordinates. All right, determine if this function is one-to-one, and we just apply that horizontal line test. And as you can see, it is not, because here it will cross more than once. It'll cross 1, 2, 3 times. So this is not a one-to-one function. Over here, same question, but they give you a function, and we need to graph that. Well, you can do an XY table if you'd like. I'll do -1, 0, 1. So the input is -1. If you plug in -1 for x, you're going to get the absolute value of -6, which is +6. If you plug in 0, you're going to get 0. If you plug in 1, you're going to get 6, which is 6. So that's going to look like a V. Anytime you have an absolute value function, it's always going to have the V shape. So for example, -1, 6 would be here, 0, 0, 1, 6. There's the V that we're looking for. All right, and if you draw the horizontal line test, it will fail. So this would not be one-to-one. Okay, assume that f is a one-to-one function. So they give you, all right, so remember we said the input of the f function is the output of the inverse function, and the input of the inverse function is the output of the regular function. So the output of the inverse function is going to be the input of the regular function. So that would be 7. Same thing down here. That's going to be 1. The input of the regular function is the output of the inverse, and the output of the regular function is the input of the inverse. So that would be 1. Okay. For this one, there's a couple ways we could do this one. We could first find the inverse function and then substitute negative 61, or we can just use our knowledge that the input function of the inverse is the output function of the regular function. So I'll do it that way. So negative 61 becomes your y-coordinate of the f function. So you just put that in here, and then you have to solve for x. So to solve for x, subtract 2, we get negative 63, negative 9x, divide by negative 9, and there we have it. X is equal to 7. All right, so for this one, there's a couple ways we can do this one. Let's do it this way. So we have a table. So ignore this for now. Let's just figure out what f of 6 is. So when x is 6, what is f of 6? Here's x equals to 6. The function is 5. So f of 6 is 5. All right, so now we're looking for the inverse of 5. Well, remember, this corresponds to the output of the regular function because it's the input of the inverse. So the output of the regular function would be this one. That's the output of the regular function. So we need to find the input, which is 6. So there it is. It is equal to 6. Whoops. The other way you can think about it is because f and f inverse are inverses of one another, they cancel each other out, and you just get 6. So that's a different way to think about it. All right. The last problem is asking us to find the actual inverse, the function inverse. So to do that, there's a few steps we need to take. Step 1 is to replace f of x with y. So instead of f of x, I'm just changing it to y. All right, step 2 would be to swap the x and the y coordinates because that's what inverse is. It's when you swap the x's with the y's and the y's with the x's. So this becomes x and this becomes y. And then step 3 is when you solve for y. So now we need to solve for y. In order to solve for y, we're going to have to multiply both sides of this equation by the denominator. That's going to leave us with y plus 4 times x equals 1. Then we can distribute, or we don't even have to distribute because we're solving for y. So you could distribute, or you could just simply divide both sides by x. And then you're going to get y plus 4 equals 1 over x. And the final step would be to subtract 4. And you're going to get y equals 1 over x minus 4. And then finally, the final step would be to change y to f inverse. So we're just changing the label from y to f inverse. And that is our final answer. So that's a 4-step process. So it's going to be 1 over x minus 4. That concludes this section.